It's Digest. I'm David. I'm joined today by Ryan Howard, King of the Boneheads. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks for having me on, David. I'm excited to talk with you today. This has been a long time coming, and like I was telling you before the show, I am a huge fan of you and the rest of the TOOKY'S mag crew and everything that you guys do on here.
Are you wearing your Top Tugger hat right now?
Yes.
I've come so close to actually putting those up for sale. I've minted 2 of them. One of them was lost in the mail. Probably like a quarter of all the money we've made on this podcast has gone to novelty hats, and half of them that were lost at sea. Actually, just Cap didn't get to his P.O. box fast enough. But anyway, yeah. And likewise, I've been listening to your stuff. We had been in touch months ago before we even did Fedbook during that the content drought when I had a lot of craziness going on. But yeah, I'm glad to finally connect. And for people that don't know you, I guess, like, why are we here? Why are we chatting? I've been excited to talk to you as a bit of an ambassador. This is my second attempt to create a diplomatic mission to sort of the TTRPG sphere that's out there. How would you introduce yourself, Ryan?
So I am a content creator and an independent publisher within the tabletop RPG space. I spent a couple years podcasting and streaming about the larger goings on within role playing games, with a very specific focus on D&D in the beginning that broadened out as I got more experienced with gaming and got to know more people. And it really became kind of a mission of discovering who the cool creators are out in the RPG world. And through that, I've gotten to know a lot of really cool people. I have had some great conversations that are still available on my YouTube channel. And even though I don't do the weekly Rollin' Bones anymore, I still stream once or twice a month and try to keep this independent spirit of role-playing games alive, especially as we are seeing the big players in role-playing games just absolutely crash out right now.
Yeah, which is something I think many people aren't aware of the depths of that aren't in the sort of TTRPG niche. And one of the reasons I was so interested was similar to you. I have dabbled in TTRPG games before, but I've been fiction writing has sort of been one of my focuses for the last several years, and I sort of found a creative sphere of people that were into that. I found it very inspiring, interesting, reading things they're putting out, and then it was really exciting for me to discover partway into this that there is sort of a sister sphere of folks that are doing a similar thing within tabletop gaming. Specifically, I tried to broach this before we had the BROZER game on, which is a whole side story I'm happy to recount to you, but that was my trial by fire introduction with I'll tell you now. So the first times I did Digest was actually because this is exactly what happened to me. I Kursova, friend of the pod, reposted something called BROZER. It had a cool little black and white art of a Daenerys being stabbed by a frogman. And I was like, oh, this is like a cool sort of punk vibe to it. I read it. That was cool. I didn't totally get it. I'd played some D&D in college, but as you know, I think you started on a more recent edition too, right? And then you went back to the older stuff. Yeah,
I started on 5th edition.
It's like another language when you see those little small font tables and of stats. It's just different. And I had Jeffrey Johnson, the sort of infamous leader of one of the sub cliques, on without knowing who he was at all. I just messaged him, hey, who's the person to talk to about this? They just directed me to him, and he was like, oh yeah, I'll talk to you. And this instantly, I just had fire coming from all sides.
Yeah,
people. I was describing to you off air before we started. It was like walking into a hillbilly family reunion and everyone's in the middle of a fight, and you just start saying your opinions, and the battle lines, you don't know where they are, but they're already drawn. So it's a very passionate sort of community of which I am still kind of feeling my way through, even though it's been about a year since I came across it. So hopefully you can help me navigate it. Like who what are sort of the spheres of the scene?
Yeah, so to and there is as much lore out there as you could possibly digest
Mm.
for all of this. So I'm going to try and condense it as best I can. Uh, Going all the way back to 2000, we have to go that far back, unfortunately. That is when Wizards of the Coast purchased the remains of TSR. And for anyone who doesn't know, TSR was the original publisher of the first two editions of Dungeons and Dragons, as well as, beginner Dungeons and Dragons, advanced Dungeons and Dragons, basic X. All of those sets were published by TSR. They made some bad business decisions as the 80s turned into the 90s, and then just kind of lost money throughout the 90s until they puttered out into near bankruptcy and were bought by Wizards of the Coast in 2000. Immediately, Wizards of the Coast set about making some changes to the rules that were controversial because, of course, when you take something that is beloved with at that point nearly 20 years of history behind it, actually more than 20 years of history, and start changing it, the original people are going to get upset. And so they did two editions, and it was right around their 3.5 fourth edition release of D&D that there was a group that said, we are tired of this. This isn't D&D anymore. Let's go back to the way that we used to play D&D. And this was before the widespread availability of PDFs on places like DriveThruRPG. So you have this group of creators that say, we are going to our best recollection, using the books that we have just sitting on our bookshelves, we are going to try to retro clone the original editions of D&D that we grew up playing. And they created a movement that has been known as the OSR. I'm going to refer to it exclusively as the OSR because the only thing that people can agree about is that the O and the S stand for old school. There have been bitter, brutal battles over what the R stands for. Some people say rules, some say Renaissance, some say revival. At one point, I said the R stood for Ryan because I thought that the battles were just stupid and ridiculous. But there was a problem with the OSR. It was successful because people didn't like what Wizards of the Coast were putting out. However, it was built on false assumptions about what the game was. It was drawn from memory, basically. There was a little bit of exploration of the books, but the general consensus at the time was that Gary Gygax wrote in a way that was completely unintelligible to the modern reader. So we're just going to have to parse through this and pull what we can from it and, try to make a game from that. And so that was the OSR. And it persisted for a while. It was very successful. Those games all sold pretty well. And eventually, Wizards of the Coast got wise to the fact that, hey, people actually want this material. And so they started making their old editions available as PDFs. They started just, selling the books again. This was probably right around 2014 when the fifth edition of the game came out, because that was the 40th anniversary of D&D, and so with a big 10-year anniversary at that point, they decided okay, all this stuff's going to be available now. All the old material is available, and so that was roughly the beginnings of the OSR, organized in right around 2004, 2005. And so they had about 10 years of kind of being the dominant force, and we are gaming in the traditional way. However, because, people had built companies around this, even though the mission was accomplished and now you can go back and play the original versions of these games, no one's just going to be like, all right, we're not going to sell games anymore. No, you want to stay in business.
Mm-hmm.
So they stuck around. And the problem with these books now being available again was that people could then go back and reread them. And it turns out that while Gygax is pretty verbose and likes to use a lot of $5 words and uh, wasn't the best at organizing as far as like organizing his thoughts into a coherent book.
Mm-hmm.
The
I
rules are
can
actually
vouch for this,
pretty.
by the way. If people have never looked at one of these old school books, it is just a wall of just text, just split into two columns a lot of the time, and it's small font. This is not. We're so spoiled now with the level of formatting that people and sweat and blood people put into the most basic of pamphlets. That kind of. I think within the culture, they're just like American culture. There just wasn't an understanding or even a thought to that stuff back then.
Right. And you don't have computers at that point. He did this in, the early to mid 70s with a typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only so much you can do. There's very minimal art in those old books. But if you can get past some of those kind of archaic formatting issues, the rules are actually pretty self-evident. And what people found was these rules were not actually followed by the OSR. They kind of made things up. They kind of house ruled stuff and ignored stuff that was maybe too complicated because when they started playing, they were 9, 10 years old. And that's just the way that the game evolved in their head. So they're playing this kind of folk D&D, but it's not real D&D. And we now have real D&D to compare it to.
So prior to 2014, it was just simply Chinese whisper game where people who had read it, maybe they even had a copy of it, but they were just making their own product based on it. But by and large, people were only viewing it through this intermediate. And then post 2014 is publicly available or fairly cheaply publicly available from WotC, Wizards of the Coast. And so, okay. And that's what sort of springboards into from OSR into this. I don't know what you call this. I guess it's more fractured OSR
Yeah,
as it seems now.
so at the same time, the OSR, it starts out as a movement of kind of traditional older guys. As the movement grows and attracts more people, you start to get some of the entryism and the invasions that you see kind of in all nerd cultures, and so you've got the old school OSR, the kind of crusty Gen Xers that you see at conventions and stuff like that, and then you've got this like rainbow OSRs, they started calling themselves, that were like, we like these rules, but we just think they need to be slightly more gay. And
Yeah, they start coming out of the woodwork.
yeah. And so you see a lot of that stuff. But this is also where guys like, and I'm sure Jeffro threw this name out here when he was on the show, but Mephrodis was kind of the first guy to start looking at stuff like this, and him and a guy called B-Dubs. I'm going to use a whole bunch of silly names on here because the internet, that's just, how we are.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm curious about. I guess one of my hopes of this conversation is for people that may listen to TOOKY'S Mag or in those circles can hopefully speed run some of the things I've learned about who are the people, and some of these people don't really produce content so much as they're just personalities on Twitter, which I don't. To be honest, I don't find the Twitter side of it very helpful or engaging.
No, it's not at all.
Yes, I would not engage with these people on Twitter. Yeah. That was one of my lessons learned, because I found it very acrimonious and not good faith, frankly, like some of the conversations.
Well, and these guys, so they start networking with each other. They start kind of getting into these group chats on Twitter, and they start formulating this truly traditional way. We're going to open up Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to run it raw. Which means rules is written, for those of you not up on the RPG lingo. And so a whole bunch of guys are starting to have success with this, and they're starting to build their own clubs with this. And along with this, because group chat on Twitter, comes this meme culture. And the meme culture stems from very insider references that only they get to the games that they're running, which is where if you see like Muppet memes, that's where that stuff comes from.
Mhm.
Um, you see a whole bunch of like Mike Menser bodybuilder memes, which I mean, those are just fun anyway, but there's this kind of other side to the movement that I'll get to in a little bit, um, where it's not just about like reading the rules and running them as written, but it's also about like, okay, you need to actually develop as a man if you're reading this stuff. Like there's almost a vitalism aspect to it, but it's also very much steeped in like Christianity. Basically, they come up with this idea that like, okay, yes, you're going to be running these games, but also like you need to be working out and you need to be going to church. And if you really dig into the cosmology of D&D, you start to come around to this idea that really only if you have a Christian context can you understand the cosmology of D&D and D and therefore understand D&D itself.
And to be clear, this is the BROSR specifically, which is
Yes.
like a subculture within this subculture that's saying
Yep.
this. Yeah,
And
which
they start
I have a lot to say about and thoughts on them. I don't want to get too sidetracked.
well, right, but they start building memes based on these concepts and start just kind of blasting them out on Twitter. And people react to them without like it's that knee jerk reaction of, you know, I see this thing and I don't understand it, but it seems to be targeting me in some way, and so I'm just going to lash out at it. And so that's where kind of the combative nature of it comes in, is people without context and without kind of engaging with the guys who are running the games this way just start going, no, nobody plays like that. Why would you do that? Why would you ever do that? You know, just kind of like going off at Jeffro. And at this point, they're not like explicitly calling people gross nerds or anything like that. They're not being full on aggressive at this point. They're just kind of memeing on each other. And the reaction to it from other people was like, no, we hate this. You're a bunch of meanies. And so that's where the vitriol comes from. Because once that happened, I mean, these guys all decided, okay, you know, we're just going to be mean. we're
Yeah,
just,
my criticism, and again, now we're in the BROSR specific, which is only a part of the group that I find interesting. I think they are counterproductive to their own goals in a lot of ways. To be honest, online, I think they have a couple cool ideas, and then I think they're extremely literalist with them. Like some of the cool ideas specifically for people again that haven't been in circles. They're about one timekeeping, where you sort of keep a calendar within like an RPG game world you're playing. You know, outside of the game, a week passes. You try to. There's a lot of ideas, and there's a ton of conversation about that. The other one being the Bronstein, which is the episode people can check out with Jeffro on it, talking about this concept of it's a little bit like a Risk game built on top of a tabletop RPG game. That's the most simple way to sort of boil it down, where you play more of a faction or the leader of a faction rather than just one little person running around. You know, two super cool ideas. But I think I think they've kind of become hyper insular with some of their conversation, and I don't want to make this conversation just about that and them, because I think that's kind of like the unfortunate side effect of like that, the way they promote themselves, which I would put in contrast to the lit sphere, which is kind of a whole other thing with this, the way we sort of hyper nicheify ourselves. But I don't want to cut off the history lesson, but I guess I would just say I think there is a longer growth tail if you build like an actual ecosystem rather than, and I've seen organizations do this before, you can become a very powerful sort of insular cult essentially, but that passion and fervor comes at the cost of long-term adherence or people just taking your best ideas and then running with them while you're sitting there in your mini group.
and this kind of is, This is kind of the end of the history lesson, because the Bro SR is a movement that really began in like 2019. Nowadays, a lot of the guys who started it have moved on to other things. Like Jeffro Johnson is no longer active online, at least not under that moniker, as far as I know. Mephrodis also like retired from Twitter, and there's a whole bunch of guys that are still doing stuff that kind of came into that sphere, but as a movement, it's kind of done. And the reason why it's kind of done is a lot of people like me, like some good friends of mine, the Basic Expert, um,
Another great person to follow, by the way.
yeah,
He's a very,
Basic
very great
Expert.
artist.
Mm-hmm. He has the single best like Mesoamerican role playing game. It's called Makalhitl. Uh, it's fantastic, and it's a game that does not shy away from exactly what it was the Aztecs were doing. Like, that's part of the mechanics of the game is, oh yeah, there's human sacrifices and you have to do that to level up and stuff like that. It's really interesting and grim and gritty and fantastic. But a lot of guys like that, guys like me, there's a girl named Harmony Ginger on X who has run a lot of Bronstein inspired games or Bronstein games directly, and posted about her results. And she has her own YouTube channel. But a lot of us have taken these ideas that were introduced to us by the Bro SR, and we started to incorporate them into our work. If you read my book, Nighthaven, the Rake's Codex of Nighthaven, it's an adventure, but it's not like a traditional adventure module. It's very much an open scenario where factions are interacting with each other, and the players basically have to go make friends with one or multiple factions and work with them. And the choices they make affect the outcome of the adventure. These are all ideas that came from the Bro SR side of things. And so their ideas really reached escape velocity. People are
Mm-hmm.
talking about them. Even like Kelsey Dion, who created Shadow Dark, which is currently like the most popular, or becoming the most popular independent RPG, like outside of the D&D ecosystem. She has directly credited them with a lot of the ideas that have made their way into her work. So it's reached escape velocity at this point. It's bigger than this original niche movement. Now the question is, what do we do with this? How do we, like you mentioned, Dave, build this ecosystem using these ideas instead of just kind of turning it into this niche group, which that's really all that the bros ever were, was, they did it for themselves basically, and then if other people learn from it, they learn from it. uh, but that's not how you build a sustainable movement. So now we're getting into, like, where do we go from here? How do we build on these ideas?
Yeah, because you don't want, people would call it grifting or something if you're trying to sell something. But ultimately, if you don't have something new, if there's no repetition of the ideas, they do get lost in time. I think of like one of the reasons I find a lot of the ideas, them and then just other people in this sphere, like Black Lodge Game Guys, they're fantastic too. And they have some good stuff on immersion. But with tabletop RPGs, there is such a absolute dog shit like normal mode of play that people are introduced to, and it's just simply through a lack of having these like messages like repeated out or provided. Because if you don't know, you don't know. You stumble into it. I think of when I played the first time in college, just absolute dog shit campaign by every measure, and it was D&D 4.0 because that's the version's out, man. That's what you play, because how would you know differently? All you know is, oh, D&D is a thing and there's a version that's out now. Of course I'll do that. And so you have to create this like first of all, like some branding lineage of knowledge, that this yeah this a self interacting sphere that people can come across and engage with, because otherwise you're leaving everything to the enemy. You're leaving an open space for them to occupy mind share. And I don't know how. That's like our sort of project at Tukey's Mag on the YouTube side really is more doing that with the book side. And I'm super excited to see more people starting to kind of do a similar ish, but their own spin on some of the stuff we've been doing after 2 years, which is super exciting. And so, and that's mostly just sort of podcast oriented, because podcasts are very sort of consumable, shareable, very low entry point. With tabletop games, it's a little different because you have to have rule systems that you orientate yourselves around. It's different from a book. A book, you can pick up a book, maybe it sucks, maybe it's good. If it's from a certain sphere, maybe that sphere loses credibility, because if people say it's good and it's actually dog shit. With RPGs, I feel like you guys have maybe there's more of like a fundamentalist requirement, because you have to have rule set buy-in from people in order to make like grounded movement together, which is I guess why you people are so passionate when you argue about seemingly completely unimportant minutia of a game system.
Well, when it comes to the rules specifically, and why those arguments get so heated, it really does come down to like Chesterton's fence. Before you tear down the fence, you have to know why it was built in the first place. So
yeah.
And there's a lot of people, again, you mentioned that kind of like bad introduction that people get. And in this day and age, a lot of people came because they saw Critical Role, which are you familiar with Critical Role?
Conceptually, I haven't seen it. I've listened to some of, oh God, what isn't the other one? Get in the Trunk is the name of the show they did, like a Delta Green game. Oh God, they're like the second or third biggest, and they seem pretty good at it. I've heard Critical Role is pretty shit.
Well, what it comes down to is they are professional voice actors and professional actors performing in a very scripted game. It's not really a game. There's writers on Critical Role. It's not at all a replicable table experience. And so people come in and think that they've got to do, like, immediately you have to have like this character in mind, like an acting type character in mind that you are going to physically play, and like you're going to have a voice for them, and you have this idea for like an arc for them, instead of coming in and just kind of letting the dice fall where they may as far as what you're playing, instead of discovering the character. They want to build out this character. They want to build their OC here in D&D, and then send their OC on their fanfic adventures. Whereas really what you should be doing is coming in, kind of taking what the game gives you. Now, there's nothing wrong with building a character if that's what your system allows for. And then taking that character on adventures and letting the adventure shape the character. You can't think of this like a novel when you come in. It only turns into like a fantasy novel type situation once the campaign is concluded. So you're not kind of walking into a story. A lot of the ways that like modules are written is you take like a fantasy novel and then you essentially rip the middle out. So you've got like a beginning and then a climax, and then you just kind of put the players on rails to get them from the beginning to the climax. You can't run games that way, because then everyone's disappointed that they don't have agency. You have to be able to make decisions and then have those decisions affect your character. And so by the end, you have what looks like a compelling narrative because you got there organically. But you can't start out with the supposition that you're going to end in a very specific place. You just kind of have to like roll with the punches.
Why do you think WotC, and just like sort of D&D in general, from what I've seen latter, the last 10, 15 years, why do they seem to promote this bad style of play? Like, are they just not playing it themselves? Are there people that just love this? That's what I find baffling, because having experienced it the one way and then experience it the other way. It's just like, okay, this is, you know, so, okay, my first real quick history lesson, old Davey. My first time playing, it was a module, this D&D module this guy was running. And it was Railroad City. It was no character interaction. Like there was like, no one had the built up backstory or you know, had a good progression there. And then the moment I remember the moment my soul died, we were like in a castle swearing or talking to the king. He told us to like swear we would fulfill this mission. And then, you know, supposedly like the oath would bind us. And then we had a wizard in the party, a friend of mine he had a clever idea. He's like, I'll use something to like pretend to make the noise out of my mouth, but I'll secretly like not say it so I don't get bound to it. And which is cool. That's like a cool twist on this railroady ass thing. And then the DM made like a bunch of invisible wizards like appear, like that were cloaked before, and they like bind us to our words, even the guy that had a trick. And I was like, okay, this is just dog shit. Like, why am I doing this? And this is their campaign. I don't think the invisible wizard thing was, I think the DM was just being at God complex or something. And then which it's funny. I was almost more inspired when later on I got a chance to DM, and I found it much more fun. It was much more open, not having any of this kind of knowledge, but just from hero of the show, Tim Kaine, playing some of his games. I was like, okay, this is the kind of experience I would want to replicate, which is funny because he made those based on classic tabletop games, but not as much D&D oriented. So yeah, what makes D&D so special with its absolute dog shit, like past 20 years, like what they've been putting out model of play?
I think, well, for one thing, Critical Role is entertaining. Like when you watch it, but again,
not even Critical Role. I mean the style of play. It seems to be like they promote with their modules.
Yeah, well, I have to mention Critical Role because that's what has informed so much of modern design at this point. So that's why I bring them up. But people, and with the module specifically, that actually goes back to Dragonlance, and a lot of people don't want to hear this because Dragonlance is this beloved thing. Those modules basically like took the novels and it did exactly what I described there. They like pulled the middle out. So you have the set story, and you can either play the Sturm Brightblade and I can't remember the other characters' names off the top of my head now because I don't really care for Dragonlance. You can play their characters or you can roll up your own, but you're gonna hop on the Dragonlance Railroad and you're gonna go all the way through this module, and then it'll take you into the next module and you'll hop on that railroad. And people bought those modules because they liked the books and they liked the art. Those novels are very entertaining novels, and so the idea at the time was you are going to play in this novel that you love so much. But you hear a lot of people talk about the books. If you really press people on them, on the modules, like the actual game modules, most people will tell you, okay, yeah, the actual modules weren't fun. It was just the plot of the book. It didn't feel like we had any agency. People will generally admit that if you press them on it. Even the most hardcore of Dragonlance fans have to admit that. And if they don't admit that, they're either wearing rose-colored glasses or they're lying to you. And that's just kind of been the model that they carried through because it's a lot of the same people that are still, or well, not anymore, but that were still working on the game from 1980 all the way up even through the WotC era. That's just kind of the mode that they put themselves in because that's, those Dragonlance modules sold well. And so, it sells well. That's how we have to do it now. And unfortunately now, we're to a point where you don't have someone as talented as like a Zeb Cook or a Tracy Hickman or someone like that working on these modules. The people who have stepped in to fill that void are completely talentless. One of my friends has joked that role-playing games are the creative drain catch. You find a lot of people in the RPG world that couldn't hack it as fantasy writers, and so they surgically removed the middle of their book, or they never wrote the middle of their book and just turned that into a quote unquote module. And that's just kind of like where we found ourselves, because that's how everyone was taught to play from really like 1983 onward. And then the rise of these actual play shows like Critical Role just kind of reinforced that, but from from kind of a soy lineal perspective.
Yeah, main character syndrome players. I have a theory I want to pitch to you also, that it's like a market phenomena based on advertising to players rather than GMs, and advertising to players, especially new players, since D&D is like the, okay, I've heard of this vague concept. I'll go to, I've heard of a hamburger. I'm going to go to McDonald's. I've heard of the tabletop. Yeah. I'm going to go play D&D. And then what does the player want? They say, oh, I want like a fantasy book adventure if I get to choose. That's my a theory that I think could be contributing. And so WotC sells them not what they actually get a good experience out of necessarily, but it's like no refunds. Like you sell what people like coming into the hobby without a great understanding of the hobby, or that have never developed one because they grew up in this slop house. You sort of sell them what they initially conceptualize as what D&D is. Oh, it's an adventure game. I have an adventure, therefore it's like an adventure book. That's at least my, like, one of the reasons I suspect it's gotten so confusing, because I just remember playing it early on. I was like, this is not how I conceptualize this being.
Yeah, and part of that, actually, the totality of that is somewhere along the way, the idea of role-playing games being games became taboo. You're not supposed to think of them as games. It's the stupid buzzword that people use now is collaborative storytelling. And there is an aspect of storytelling and narrative to the game. However, a lot of the people that came in after those, after 1980, after the AD&D era, the golden era of D&D, they heard people telling stories about things that happened in their campaign, and they just assumed that, oh, like that was the plan from the beginning. They didn't understand the context of, like, this was the sum total of events that kind of led up to this. This was the sum total of all of our choices compounded in this big giant mess that we found ourselves in, and then somehow we made it through. They just hear, oh, there was this big epic event, this big battle that happened, and that must have been planned. So I have to plan for this grand epic story, because what they said sounded almost like Lord of the Rings. So I've got to come up with my own Lord of the Rings here. And unfortunately, very few of us are J.R.R. Tolkien or even close to that. So it's a lot of kind of being in Plato's cave and seeing the shadow puppets in front of you. You don't really understand what those things actually were. You don't have the context for them. And so, of course, your perception of what they actually are is distorted in a lot of ways. And that goes away if you think of role-playing games as games first and foremost. And the reason why people don't like calling them games is games are competitive. Like that's part of the definition of a game. And they think, well, RPGs aren't competitive, they're collaborative. Well, they are competitive. There is a competition aspect to role-playing games. It can be the players versus the GM and the monsters that he's controlling. That's one way to think of it. But it can also be competitive between the people at the tables. You've got a choice of alignment when you roll up your character. And some people are going to play good characters and some people will play evil characters. There will be alliances of convenience that come about. The whole notion of we're going to go down into this dungeon that's too dangerous for any one of us to attempt to go into. But if a fighter, I can fight things, but I can't read runes or find traps or anything like that. I'm stupid and clumsy. If I can bring a thief with me who can help me disarm traps and get through tight spaces, if I can bring a wizard with me who can decipher all of these magical runes and help me disarm spells, and bring a priest with us so that he can dispel any curses or kill any undead that we come across, or heal us if we really get into a bad situation. Now you've got these alliances of convenience that are forming, and in the end you get that treasure that's at the bottom of the dungeon, and split it amongst yourselves to do whatever it is you want to with it. But at some point, if you adventure long enough and start kind of building up your own domain and identity for yourself, and this is where the faction play thing that Brozer mentions, and that Jeff Rowe probably talked way too much about, and that I talk way too much about, comes back in. When you look at level titles in old school D&D, at 10th level, a fighter becomes a lord, meaning he has a manor, he has retainers, he has men-at-arms. A cleric becomes like I can't remember the exact title, but you basically now like run a parish. So you've got acolytes, you have monks and nuns that answer to you, you have parishioners that you have to take care of. Everyone ends up having these domains that build up around them as they get more experienced. And so you naturally evolve as you grow in experience and wealth into this kind of faction type player. And in some cases, the fighter who now runs this fief, does he really want an active thieves guild operating out of his capital city, making things difficult for his citizens? That's not law and order. So he's either going to have to make a deal with that thief that he used to adventure with and say, hey, like, you have to leave certain people alone. We're going to turn a blind eye to certain things, but like you have to operate within a set of rules, or I am going to hunt you down. I am going to kill all of your thieves in the public square. I'm going to hang you in front of everybody. That's a competitive game now.
It is a fundamentally different type of game, though, which something I've heard is that tabletop RPGs. One of the core sort of conflicts, things that cause conflict, is that it's almost like like 5 genres of game smushed into one, and one of them being, which is like sort of a newly resuscitated one, is this Bronstein idea, like you're mentioning, where people could control factions, but there is that role play element. But I think inherent in that style is probably less role play heavy in the way most people would do or consider role play. Like the our guys in particular, are we have a very unique flavor, shall I say, with the Muppets of what they consider role play. And having played in one of their Bronsteins, like I was like fighting versus like Brad Pitt and like some others like ridiculous characters. It's like for me that was not my cup of tea. It was a fun game, really nice guys, but it was like that's not it doesn't give me that sense of world that I guess that I look for, which is like one of the interesting ways it breaks out. And why I love this OSR and also new SR. I want to get new SR pilled if you know any more about them than I do. Is it these spheres are, I think, maybe even unintentionally, but they're also boiling down the language and like creating a little more clear boundaries to like conceptualize these things that, sort of the D&D slop era maybe was cluttered and confused, just like, throw some wizards in here, here's some spells from WoW to throw at each other. I think people are experimenting, and there's some of these, I think these are the new SR games, things like, was it Morkborg and Mothership, which I'm hoping to do a Mothership game at some point. I'm like, it looks interesting. I know it's like rules minimal, so probably cause a lot of seeth among maybe some Bro SR guys, but I'm curious, like, what do you see the rift there between new SR, OSR, if there even is such a thing?
So I hate to burst your bubble this way, but
hit me with
the
it.
new SR, one, they are incredibly shit libby. Like
No.
that's how they are.
Mm.
That's the kind of person that is kind of, drawn into that. And it comes a lot from the punk aesthetics that they adopt in their
Mm.
work. It's just that type of person is drawn to that specific style. The big problem with them, though, and Morkborg is perhaps the biggest offender of this. One, the books are nigh indecipherable, just
Yeah.
from a
But ironically, I would take Gygax over Morkborg.
yeah.
I'm not a Gygax fan in particular of his writing style, but it's for people that haven't seen it, Morkborg is like a page is just a giant neon yellow color with like a blood splattered mace on it, and then like a 6d1 or 1d6 like written next to it, and like, wait, what? And it's telling you that's how much damage a mace does, and that's like a whole spread.
Yeah, but
It's insane.
it is definitionally vibes based gaming. The reason why they go so heavy on the aesthetics is they don't have any substance to their games. Now, I have heard like Mothership, I've heard is a complete game, and I've heard it's good. Um, my personal disagreements with the creator of it aside, it is a mechanically complete game.
Mm.
Morkborg is not, and a lot of these games follow more the Morkborg template than
It's more meme now than man.
yeah. Well, but you read the book and you try to put all the mechanics together. And one, if you just like wrote all the mechanics out on a sheet of paper, you'd have like a single sheet of paper.
Mm.
And it doesn't account for a lot of the situations that you run into. There's this attitude of minimalism for its own sake that kind of,
Rankles at
yeah,
the OSR Chud's
well,
heart.
but the problem with it is it just doesn't work. You try to run the game if you don't have any knowledge of how role playing games work, and you try to run Morkborg as your first game, you are going to have the worst time of your life because it's going to be so confusing to you. These games lean heavily on you having a context of role playing already built up so that you can fill in the gaps that they've left for you. It's literally just like a vibe to place over top of your vague D&D knowledge that you already have. Because whenever you talk to someone who says, "Oh yeah, I play Morkborg," and you again like kind of press them and say, "How do you play Morkborg?" and they go, "Well, we play Morkborg, but we use this game for this mechanic and we use this game for this other mechanic." And you're like, "Okay, so you're not playing Morkborg, you're playing a Franken game with like Morkborg graphics on it, essentially." And this is kind of the frustrating thing when it comes to role-playing games now. If we are going to have something that can compete with Wizards of the Coast, which is epically crashing out, like I said at the top here, um, they are in such a weak position. They have released the least popular edition of the game. Um, they are
Could you give
consistent.
like the 1 minute recap for people that aren't aware? I guess I can just say from my knowledge, they had was it 2014? That was the really popular five,
Yep, in 2014. So,
and then that had like a great run.
yep.
And what's it called? That show with the kids in the 80s, and there's a bunch of hype, and then there was a COVID huge breakout with Critical Role, which I'm sure had downsides too, but in terms of just their raw popularity, it was enormous. And then there was was it OGL or whatever, the debacle where they started to make people withdraw license, like access to their previously unlicensed materials or something
Yeah,
like
so
that.
the OGL has been with the game since WotC took over in the early 2000s, and the idea was
Open
we're
game
going
license,
to
right?
yeah we're going to allow people to make we're going to allow third party supplemental material, uh, basically to give our games more life. We don't want to take on all the publishing costs because in the 90s they released like hundreds of books for second edition AD&D. There's like a ninja splat book. There's a whole bunch of just nonsense books out there, and they spent a whole bunch of money printing them and they did not sell well enough to make up that cost. That's how they got where they were. So the idea was if you want to make your own like nonsense splat book for D&D, you third party publisher can take all that risk and um, if it's successful, then it'll allow people, or people will be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Now I need to go buy the D&D book so that I can use this other cool book. And that's kind of the way that they operated with it. Once this new edition was coming out, and before I circle back to that, this was also what enabled the OSR to do what they did in the early days, because they were technically uh, printing rules for another game, but you can't copyright a rule system. Just legally speaking, you're not able to copyright like rules to a game. You can copyright certain material, like actual intellectual property, names of stuff, uh, things that, branding that makes your game legally distinct, but the actual rules are non-copyrightable. Um, it enabled the OSR to do everything that they did. And then this new edition is coming out, and Hasbro, who now owns Wizards of the Coast, who owns D&D, so we're getting into mega corporations that own everything at this point, interfering in these kind of niche hobbies. They go, we're probably going to pull the OGL and replace it with something that's a little bit more favorable to us, that basically allows us to take ownership of your material if it's successful enough. This is all very like overly simplified for what happened, but essentially there was a giant chimp out and they had to back off of that position, and it really hurt their brand in the long run. The fact that they tried to pull a fast one on people that had really made their livelihoods on third-party D&D material. And it really was an epic chimp out that happened. Like it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, as far as just the internet freaking out about something that in the long run is stupid and trivial, but like it was beautiful.
I guess I think that's a good recap of it. Do you think so? If the new SR is the RB shit libs, do you see as the OSR inherently just D&D ecosystem, sort of a continuation of D&D? Do you think it can, within your reckoning of it, is it trapped within that? Did the chuds just have to play old school D&D, or what's the future?
The future, in my mind, is the chuds have to like make their own games. We've gotten into this, and I attribute a lot of this to Gen X. Maybe this isn't fair to just kind of lay it at their feet. They do make up the bulk of like your old school RPG fans, though. A lot of RPG culture is Gen X culture, um, specifically of like the Kevin Smith variety. So you have a lot of that type of person in gaming, which is why people find gamers so insufferable a lot of times. They are content to just kind of live in their childhood forever, and they don't really. Some of them are like, yeah, you can come play, but you have to play in my childhood as I remember it. And if you're like, well, I don't remember the '80s at all, why do I care about any of this stuff? Then they have an epic crash out on you, and they're like, well, you stupid kids, you don't understand.
Is
We
this the
drank
origin
from,
of my 40 years?
yeah,
I've
my
heard this
40
bounced
years.
around. Yeah.
And when you're like, hey, you're not reading this book correctly, they're like, well, you don't have an enlarged prostate from being 50. What do you know?
Prostate lit.
Yeah. But they're going to live in their walled garden fantasy land of their childhood as they remember it. And it's going to die with them. I hate to be so grim about it, but like that's just that iteration of the game is not replicable. It's going to die with those people. And that will leave either the kind of corporate entity that is Dungeons and Dragons TM now, or something else to take its place. And everyone thinks that brands are immortal. Again, like this is why people get so butthurt about Star Wars not being good anymore, or like Marvel Comics not being good, or things like that. This is the whole like premise of the culture war. Like, yes, these people did come in and just kind of run these franchises into the ground. Yes, they did make a mockery of something that you loved. Yes, they did kill it. But now it's dead. We're not going to be able to resuscitate it. We just have to build something new with the fond memory of that thing in our hearts. We have to do what someone like George Lucas did when he took, Kurosawa films and Dune and Saturday morning movie serials and stuck them in this weird creative blender, and out came Star Wars. And that's the essential DNA of Star Wars that I listed there for you. We can do that. We can take, things that we love like D&D and, the fantasy novels that we grew up reading and enjoying, and we can use that to inspire our own creativity and build our own kind of parallel institutions, as it were. It's parallelism at the end of the day, and it's going to take a long time, but someone's got to do it, or it's over. Because as we've seen,
the longer we don't do it,
yeah,
the longer you don't have that start, and you get hopefully through what's the rough beginning years.
Yeah, and as we've seen, the corporate D&D can't actually stand on its own. It has been proven that foundation is structurally unsound. That tower is going to fall down. So we can't like push people towards it and go, I guess that's what gaming is now. No, that tower is going to fall down too.
Yeah. It's just hard it's building that centralizing factor we were talking about earlier that is sort of the big challenge. And I think right now you guys it's like you're building up maybe a consistent language, and then over time maybe it'll mature into something people can get sort of onboarded into from the get-go with this seeming decline of D&D, but time will tell.
And part of that is codifying these core principles instead of relying on Mike Menser memes and Muppet memes and tweet threads and blog posts and just like hundreds of hours of play reports and stuff like that to say like you have to know all of this before you come into the table. Taking the usable material from that and synthesizing it into an actual book, an actual physical thing that someone can read, that doesn't take too long, that just explains the mechanics, the philosophy, the ideas. Now it's time to play. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah. We've talked about this with in terms of books. It's sort of like or at least I have, in terms of like there's like inherent values in the way you write things and the way you prioritize. And so, having a core book that just lists these in one easy starting point is essential. And maybe for now it's like people have to just, I guess I hope people are unafraid to just take a stab at it. And maybe yours isn't the one, but it's out there. And then if nothing else, maybe you'll give someone else the courage to do their own or to do a more polished version of yours. And, if they make money at it, good for them. But I to your early example of Star Wars and classic WotC, like the clear thing is like the spirit of the people that were making it is the actual specific people that are creating it. It's not the name brand. It's not the this like corporation, but they can never get that like initial creative spark for creative properties. So they can't maintain it. There's like a built-in entropy. It just sort of loses its identity over time.
Well, yeah, and things can't last forever. I mean, did you listen to the most recent episode of the Digital Archipelago on your RCA radio while you were driving in your Hudson automobile today? No,
I did. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I did listen to it. Yeah, not on my RCA radio. No.
Or in your Hudson
Shout
automobile.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have Hudson's head mounted on the front of my car. So I do receive some signals through that. Shout out TR Hudson.
Yep. Love you, TR Hudson.
Yeah. Friends of all shows. Do you have anything else you want to try and cover, Ryan?
No, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, at this point, it really is just trying to build a common language and trying to build a common culture around role playing. And it's the thing that all of us in this thing of ours, as Thomas 777 likes to say, it's the thing that we're all running into, whether it's on the culture side or the politics side, or whatever it is. We're all trying to figure out what comes next, because everything's falling around behind us. I will turn 30 in December, and I feel like I was running out of. I feel like I was Indiana Jones running out of the tomb as it was collapsing behind me, culturally, because a lot of this stuff was starting to happen as I was in high school and college. So I feel like I've just run out, and now I'm looking around and everything's just like fallen down around me. I'm just like, okay, now what do I do? And I think a lot of people are in the same position as me, especially people that are around my age and younger.
Yeah. And
And
tabletop games are great as like a social connector too. Superior to books, actually. Like books, I think are great in their own way. And, I think it's good to create a sort of a common core of culture, or try to, because it builds like a certain mental, linguistic, whatever framework and reference framework. But in terms of just like getting people around a table, I think games are like, specifically these types of games, because a machine can't replicate the things a tabletop game does. That's kind of the beauty of it. And if a machine can replicate it well, is a shitty tabletop game. um, yeah, go ahead.
well, you hit on something very important there. And this is, I know we've talked a lot about them, but this is one of the big things that I actually praise the Bro SR for advocating for, and that's this club style of play, where playing D&D can really turn into like the old fashioned bridge club or poker night that you would see on like Leave It to Beaver or something. Uh, you know, or to make something that's a little bit more to the millennial sensibility, like Malcolm in the Middle, when Hal would go play poker with all of his black friends. That's what D&D should be for us, is a way for like guys to bond with each other in physical space together, face to face, and we play this game, but we also just like bro out and have bro time. And RPGs can really be that for us. We have to embrace the community aspect of it, and really view it that way, not as this low status weird thing that a bunch of creepy smelly guys do. No, it's a community building exercise.
But the host scaring can be a feature, not a bug,
Yes.
actually,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's something I talked about in my my recent gaming essay, where I was like, gaming hit a sweet spot where in like the early 2000s, where it was uncool that enough that girls weren't interested into it. No offense to women, I love women. I just don't. You just need to have guy spaces
Yeah,
sometimes, for the
you
love of
do.
God. And gaming used to have that more. Gaming now is completely, for many reasons, is a disaster. But tabletop games, I could see maybe, maybe there's a way to work female in. I've never seen the point personally. I think it is. I think there is something inherently broy, um, in it, and or when women join, I think they probably have to have a certain masculinity. I say this. I was I had a terrible. I'm sure everyone's had a terrible experience to play a tabletop game of like of someone that had a girlfriend that came along, and she was just like a vampire, like over his shoulder the whole time. It was awful. Yeah. Anything else you want to get to?
No, I mean that's the long and short of it. And again, we all kind of find ourselves in a common struggle here. We're all sensitive young men at heart, looking for other sensitive young men to network with. And
But wait, insensitive young men grinder. Where should they go? So someone has patient enough to listen to us as we're chatting about, history of this sort of tabletop games and what's been going on in the last 2 decades, and how there's this circle of dudes that are out there. We've mentioned a few names already. But there is no Jeffro Johnson Quran yet to pick up to like get these principles down. I'm sure he'd love it if there was, but like where would they go? I'm not even sure if I have an answer for this, having like dabbled in this stuff for the last couple months. But yeah, what's the path?
For right now, the guy who's kind of got everything laid out in the clearest possible terms, accessible for anyone who's willing to just actually engage with this stuff in good faith, go to the Basic Expert. He's got a Substack where he posts, actual articles, and he has a YouTube channel where he does both long form streams and short form videos where he talks about specific concepts. And he's really good at just kind of outlining, here's how alignment works. This is where it came from. Here's how this mechanic is supposed to function. No, encumbrance is not stupid. Here's the reasons why. He's done a good job at kind of synthesizing these ideas. It's still a lot to digest, but he's one that has done a good job with it. And, I'm not just going to shill for my friends here. You can also go to my YouTube channel and see some of the streams that I've done. You can go to
the real authority. I would recommend your channel. I have learned a lot listening to yours, and I would throw Black Lodge Games, especially some of their older, when they were more of a podcast format, they were starting out. It's more awkward, but it's more keynote in some ways, and they like cover more specific topics rather than be more like a. Nowadays, I think they do more of a general variety show. But anyway, they had some really cool stuff on from a slightly different perspective, because I know I think people will probably pick up just listening to this. There's sort of a gradient of more old school D&D grognard to maybe these are like quasi new SR bros. I think that's what I'd say like the Black Lodge guys are. Like I mentioned, with there being several hobbies smushed together under this label. I think that's why it's really cool to think about it, because people talk about these concepts and people talk about there's only one right way, but then you also have to consider they're playing a very particular kind of game, and kind of you can merge boundaries on these things. That's kind of the fun of it, is maybe it'll freaking suck, but whatever, you're having an experiment and you're learning something, and you're being social people, so that's always fun. And yeah, I think that gives people at least a path forward, and hopefully a few people will wake up to this being a sphere, and hopefully we get a chance to connect more with you and others. If you ever want to cover a book, Ryan, just give me a shout out if you know somebody in that sort of sphere that's written something, LITBRO or otherwise. Maybe we'll figure out some excuse to get you back on.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on. I hope this was the right kind of Spurgy and not the wrong kind of Spurgy.
There's no wrong kind here. As you know, we've spurred on just about anything. But thank you everyone for listening. If you've listened this far, be a real top tugger today. Buy a hat like Ryan has, and like, subscribe, of course. If you listen to all this and you're still not subscribed to either me or Ryan, like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Honestly,
yeah.
Drop a comment, rate if you're listening to on the whatever platform. Like, I hugely appreciate everyone. A lot of people have done that, and it's extremely generous of you. I actually just went on our iTunes. I literally had not gone on since I set it up, and there was a couple extremely nice comments on there from people. So more soon. Thank you again, Ryan. Have a good night, everybody.